Savannah. Built for science, ready for regulation.
Reverse translational research, from clinical reality back to discovery.
So, Miren, normally we're very busy with our daily routine, and seldom we have time to stop, to pause and reflect and have a nice and calm conversation. And so for me, this is exciting to have this opportunity to do it today. So I want to start with something that maybe connects precisely with your career. You're now working at Savannah, doing AI and doing real world evidence, but you come from a background as a clinical oncologist where you did a lot of research, and you did clinical research and translational research. And I'm bringing this because it's not a new concept, but I'm quite excited with this idea of reverse translational research, where we have the opportunity to go somehow backwards from real world evidence to earlier stages. And I would like to have your opinion about this.
Yeah, I think that we are in an amazing situation now. We are used to traditional translational research when we get information from the lab and get it into the patient. But now we can do it in another way and take information from patients and took it to the lab. So we are closing a cycle here. It is not a line, it is a cycle, and we are using all the information in all the ways. So in the past, we do not have good real-world data, and that was because everything was based on manual chart review and registries that were not dynamic. So now we have the possibility with AI techniques such as machine learning or clinical NLP, natural language processing, to structure all the information that comes along the patient. And when we are talking about oncology, oncology is pretty complex. We need to understand patients' characteristics, adverse events, treatment pathways, outcomes. So we do have a lot of information in the clinical history of the patient that we can use to better optimize how we develop all the clinical trials.
Living oncology data. Why static datasets are no longer enough.
So you said it, that in oncology there is a lot of complexity, and it's not only complex, but it's changing all the time. I would say not in oncology, but in general in medicine, but maybe more specifically in oncology with all the treatments, the effects, the toxicities, everything changes, biomarkers all the time. And it turns out, however, that in research, what we do is quite static, not only clinical trials, which you would assume, but also even with observational research, it is also static. You have a cut of information, you publish it, you read it, whatever, and then 3-5 years later, you have new information, while that's not what's happening in reality. So how do we handle this?
Yeah, this is a key question that we need to address. Oncology is complex and is dynamic, and patients are dynamic as well. So patients may have a different situation in a different moment, their immune system, their genetic status. So we have a lot of things that may change along the way. So when we try to characterize, for example, a cohort, we do need to have it in a longitudinal way. We do need to have information that it is dynamic and at different points. It's not like a snapshot, it is like a movie, because this information is the one that it is going to give us the capacity to choose better options for treatment. So we need to get information that it is updated in a regulatory system, so we can see what it is happening to a patient or to a cohort, but not only into a moment, into a lifetime. So then we can really understand what it is happening and how diseases are changing.
Yeah, the very simple example that comes to my mind when I hear you is when we, and there are many examples, but it's just one, when we stopped going to the shop to buy a CD, a physical piece of music, and we got streaming of music all the time,
yeah.
Right?
We do need like a platform where we have all that information coming from the patients, and we can understand what it is happening and answer to every question at every different moment with the information that it is really important for that.
Regulatory grade evidence.
From exploration to clinical reliability.
And talking of research and modalities, we have clinical trials, which are the gold standard, and that's going to be like that. But then we have real-world evidence, which more and more is getting accepted, is becoming part of the evidence that is needed to understand how drugs work, right? And I think that's good news because it enriches the experiment, which is a clinical trial. But the but is that we are, and we should be, I guess, cautious because we've seen cases in the past where real evidence wasn't reflecting the reality and was full of bias and gaps. So how if we're talking about using this type of new data or AI-based data, which is very exciting when I hear you, but if we're talking about using that for a very important and rigorous process like it is the regulatory phase of approving drugs, how do we do it so that it's reliable?
So for regulatory decisions, we really need data that it is complete and it is fit for purpose. This is mandatory. We cannot negotiate that. We have a great opportunity now because we have the European health data space that it is opening a new door for all Europe to share the data and guarantee that we are going to have a governance, interoperability, standardization, and of course, a way of validation that data, because that must be mandatory. There are a lot of researchers working in different hospitals, acting as like silos in one way. So we now have the opportunity to get all that information all together and really understand what it is happening. But we do need a framework, a methodological framework, and a validation framework to follow some guides and guarantee that this information is going to be good enough to answer a regulatory question. So now we are working deeply on defining these guidelines to be able to share across all Europe all that information. So then we can, with that information, try to do what we were talking about, reverse translational research.
We've been in this field for several years now in real-world evidence and so on, and we somehow sometimes have the impression when we talk to your colleagues, other oncologists, that they were, I don't want to say dismissing, but they were somehow thinking, look, what matters here is clinical trials. That's where we decide things. Real-world evidence is like a side thing, not very important. And you've always been a supporter of real-world evidence being something that is going to grow, is going to become very important. You were talking at some point even about maybe seeing units in the hospitals dedicated only to real-world evidence, which maybe at some point will happen. How far do you think this is going to get? How important and how long is it going to take us?
I think that now the EMA has understood that real-world data and real-world evidence is necessary to really understand what it is happening. And I do believe that together, both data coming from clinical trials and data coming from the real world are going to be the gold standard. But we do need to use both together, because when you design a clinical trial, if you don't really understand what it is happening in the real world, what it is happening with the standard treatments, what it is happening to those patients and to those subgroups of patients, you are not going to design well a clinical trial. You really need to know the natural history, you really need to know the outcomes of those patients, and taking all this knowledge to really decide how is your design. And this is something that it is happening now. And I think we do not need to wait many times to see a lot of, for example, pharmaceutical companies using that data to improve and optimize the clinical trial design.
That's very interesting.
human-in-the-loop validation, why clinical oversight remains essential.
So going back to your background again, you were practicing as an oncologist, in particular in head and neck, in the Institut Català d'Oncologia, and as a successful clinician and researcher, at some point you decide, I don't want to say stop, but pause my career. That's what I like saying about myself when I think about neurology. It's a pause, okay? But then you start dedicating your time, your energy, your effort to something very different, which is AI for medicine, but AI, technology, information systems, and pretty much everything we've been talking about. But the question that comes to my mind, and I'm sure many of your colleagues, oncologists, are asking you is, why are you doing this? Why are you dedicating your time and your career to this? What do you think you're providing?
So for me, it was a challenge to take that decision, but I think that it was a great decision indeed. To apply AI in medicine, you do really need doctors in the loop, and this is mandatory. Diseases or algorithms in that sense can understand diseases in a different way that humans can do. And doctors can deeply understand what a disease means or what a patient needs. So I think that for using AI, you really need to have the right questions. And doctors and physicians and people working with patients are the ones that are doing that question. So for me, this is something that it is really important to make artificial intelligence work in medicine. And in another hand, we do still need validation and to have humans in the loop. And this is still mandatory. Maybe if we have this conversation in 10 years, we do not need humans in the loop to validate AI. But the truth is that now that we are starting and we want to apply algorithms that make doctors have better decisions to their patients, we still need to validate that. And humans are needed in that part. So I think that myself and all the department at Savannah that we are working here, we try to give this vision from the doctor perspective to try to make the outputs really go to the patients, to what patients really need.
Yeah, when we study how AI works in clinical workflows, we usually see concepts repeating, like context, like counterfactual thinking. So how are things, but how could they be? So the kind of things that databases cannot think about, just causality and being in the real world can provide you that. That's very interesting.
The next question's in oncology. What AI finally makes possible?
Okay, so artificial intelligence, algorithms, predictive models, information systems, all of this is very exciting. I think most of the community is already aware that this is coming or it's already here. 5 years ago, 3 years ago, it was a different thing. Now, pretty much everybody knows. But I'm sure that most people, or maybe some people in the oncology world, when they hear this, they think, so what? What does it really bring? What is it really going to bring, this kind of technology, I mean, to oncology in the next, say, 5 years?
So I think that it is going to bring a lot of things, but I will mention the ones that I think it's going to make the best game changer. First of all, I think that AI is going to change the way we develop drugs and we combine drugs in different schemes and how we can do the modeling for drug development. But I do also believe that AI is going to give us a lot of opportunities to see how we define oncology patients and how we decide treatments. For example, if we think how we stage patients in the different tumor types, we use TNM staging. And in the TNM staging, that it's going to give us the prognosis of the patient, and based on that, we are going to select the treatment, the best treatment option. We are only analyzing the tumor sites the nodes, if there are or not nodes, and if there are or not metastases, TNM. Now in new editions, they are starting to use other parameters, but I do think that patients has a lot of information that we can combine and make an extended TNM system where we are using biomarkers or AI biomarkers based on information that we are structuring from their histories. So TNM is not enough. We can open it and we have more. We have the opportunity to have more accurate prognosis. Once we have that, then we have the ability to generate specific predictive models to understand which is the best treatment for the patients, and not only including outcomes such as overall survival or progression-free survival, but we can include in the models, for example, adverse events, quality of life, and use all that information to really decide which is the best treatment for that patient in that moment. And I think that this is going to be the real change in oncology.
And as of today, not in the future, but as of today, do you think that with AI and machine learning, we have the possibility of defining the optimal sequence of treatment at individual level?
I do think that we have. We need to work on the validation process to make that happen, but we have the capabilities to do that nowadays. Yeah.
Has been a pleasure to have this opportunity to, as I said at the beginning, to stop and have this discussion with you. I hope we have further discussions in the future as we get more and more results.
Thank you so much, Ignacio.
Savannah, built for science, ready for regulation.